Well, it's finally warm enough to plant some tomatoes. And today I'm going to share with you my 5 simple steps to planting your tomatoes that can help set you up to have a more successful harvest this year. I'm also going to share with you a bonus tip about planting your tomatoes in containers. So before you plant your tomatoes, you want to make sure that you're past your last frost date and there's no risk of frost in the next 2 weeks. The other thing you want to make sure is that you've hardened off your tomatoes. Okay, so I have my raised bed here and I've topped it up with some compost. I'm going to be planting these pink boar tomatoes. Our first step is to decide how far apart we want to plant our tomatoes. You're going to read anywhere from a foot apart to 4 feet apart or more. And this is all going to depend is how much you want to prune your tomatoes. If you're going to do a lot of pruning and trellising up, you can plant them closer together, making sure you have a good quality soil. If you're just going to want to let them grow, just put them in a cage and not do anything, you're going to want to plant them farther, like 4 feet apart. Also, depending on your humidity, if you live in a very humid climate, you're going to want it a little bit farther apart, do a little more pruning. We're pretty dry here, so I can get away with having them a little closer together and maybe less pruning, we'll see. So our next step is adding amendments, or should you add any amendments? You're gonna see people adding anything from tomato fertilizer, eggshells and coffee, just a whole egg in there, bone meal, blood meal, so many different things. This is gonna depend on your soil. So I generally don't recommend adding a specific thing. If you've done it before, it works for you, great. If you try it, it might work for you. Again, I'm simplifying this. A lot of people get concerned about calcium and a common tomato problem, which is blossom end rot, which is considered a lack of calcium. But blossom end rot is due to poor watering, prevents the tomato plant from accessing the calcium in the soil. You can have lots of calcium. You don't need to add more calcium. You just need to make sure that you water correctly, which is you don't want to let them dry out and then drench them, because that can cause that. Now again, adding these amendments usually won't hurt your plant, so go ahead if you want to, but it's not 100% necessary to get a good quality harvest. So our step number 3 is going to be to bury your tomato. I'm sure you've heard a lot of this, but tomatoes grow roots off of their stems. Right there you can see all those little bumps are going to be roots. We want to bury this down in order to give us a better root system. Last year I did not stake or trellis a bunch of my big tomatoes, and it was actually a neat experiment because they grew up and they fell over and they'd root down and they'd basically grow another tomato plant, and they kept doing this. So while I might not have got the biggest harvest, it was neat to see how they grow. It's a very natural way to plant your tomatoes, is to bury them deep. It's actually how tomatoes want to grow. Now there are 2 ways we can bury them. We can dig a really deep hole and plant it down. Or if you have a really tall, lanky, leggy tomato, you can plant them sideways in a trench and then they'll start to grow up. I did this way last year because I was working in a really hard soil. So if you can't dig too deep because your soil's too hard, go ahead and plant them in a trench style. I'm actually going to be planting mine in a trench style here early. We are still a little bit cool and the soil is warmer closer to the surface. So by planting them in a trench style, the roots and the system will be warmer, so they should be able to grow a little bit quicker and better. So I'll show you here how we're just going to dig a hole. We'll do the hole method first. Again, this works really good if you have nice loose soil. 4th tip, and that is watering. When we first plant our tomatoes, I'm not going to water it for 1 week. With the goal being, we want the roots to start stretching downwards to get to the water. So what I'm gonna do is water this hole. So there's a nice amount of water underneath the tomato. And then I'm going to take my tomato and I'm going to remove these bottom stems here. So we have a nice long stem we can get into the ground there. Tease it out of its container. Try to keep as many roots intact as you can. And I'm gonna set it down there. You can loosen up this a little bit, but I if it's not too root bound, I don't like to. And then we're just gonna bury it up. Just give it a nice gentle press. Now because I do want some roots to start growing, I'm gonna give it a quick water just on top, about maybe 5 seconds. And now we'll wait and let it grow. So with the trench method, depending on the size of your tomato is going to be how far apart you can put them, because you're going to use a lot of width this way. But all you're going to do is dig probably about 3 inches down, I would say, and dig a nice long trench. And then the same thing, we're going to want to remove these bottom stems. You can use nippers, I just use my fingernails. Probably take this one off too. And we're going to pop it out of the container. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lay it sideways. As you can see, I did not get far enough down here, so we'll just dig a little bit where that root ball is going to go. And then you're just going to cover it up. And you don't want to bend the stem, be very careful. And I like to just put a little bit underneath here. And then dig this out because you do not want the leaves touching. It looks kind of weird now, but what's going to happen is the tomatoes will reach for the sun. So this is going to start stretching up and it's going to go straight up from here. So as I plant these last few here, we're going to talk about my fifth and final simple step, and that is mulch. You'll hear a lot of people talking about how Mother Nature doesn't want to be bare, she's modest. If you don't cover her, she'll cover herself, which is true. You get weeds and everything. Things want to grow. So by mulching, you can help prevent weeds, and it also helps to keep the moisture in the soil so you don't have to water as frequently, and it prevents the extremes of that big dry wet cycle. A caveat to this, and this is what I'm going to be doing, I'm not actually going to mulch these for the first couple of weeks. Because we are in a cooler climate, I want to make sure that that soil has as much chance as it can to warm up. So I'm going to wait a couple of weeks, and then after it really, really warms up and it gets hot, then I'll mulch it because that's when we really want to keep that water in. Now, as for what you can use for mulch, you can use straw, hay, grass clippings are really popular. The only thing I would not recommend would be freshly chipped wood chips because they would actually steal nitrogen from the soil as they break down. What I'm actually going to try this year is using some of my old felt grow bags and using felt, because some people will mulch with felt or wool even. Now, as promised, a little bonus about how to grow tomatoes in containers. You can grow anything from like a little tiny Tim in a small container like this up to this large container for the big, large, indeterminate tomatoes. The thing to remember is, and this actually is for in-ground tomatoes as well as in containers, is that the size of the plant is actually determined by the size of the roots. And while we're constantly thinking about growing a plant, if we can focus on thinking about growing the roots of the plant, then you will have more success. So you could grow a huge tomato in here, but it's going to have small roots, it's going to be a small plant. Whereas something like this gives it lots of room for the roots, so there'll be lots more plant. So really, you can grow them in any size container. It's just going to be the larger container, the better. But of course, a tiny Tim in here is only going to grow so big. Just remember with containers is that you might need to add some nutrients during the growing year, as well as they are going to require more frequent watering. There we go. A few simple ideas to think about when you're planting your tomatoes so you can have a more successful harvest this year. And as these grow, I'll do some more videos about trellising and staking, as well as pruning your tomatoes. If you got some value from this video, don't forget to hit the like button and go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can see all the updates as these tomatoes grow this year. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.